All right.
Um, yeah, so a big part of what you're going to be doing is going to be resolution writing, right? And so it's important that we learn how to do that. So Andrew is going to give you the heads up on that. You are supposed to have read from the delegate guide. If you were following the syllabus, remember that friend of our syllabus that tells you what happens each class, right? And the syllabus tells you that today we're doing resolution writing, and that I think it was page 28 to 40 something on the delegate guide. If you have not read it, that is not that's not a suggestion. It's I'm telling you to read it for multiple reasons. One, it's very clear. Two, you are going to actually bring a copy of that part with you to the conference. Specifically, when you read in the delegate guide, when you're going over the resolution writing section, you have a list of clauses that, first of all, you're not going to be able to memorize all of them anyways. Might as well bring the thing with you because you are going to need it when you're sitting down and working on resolution writing. Andrew's going to talk to you more about preambular clauses and so on, but that's going to be really helpful. So again, not a suggestion, people. Am I being clear enough? Um, what else I want to say? Yes, I think that's it for now. So I'm going to let Andrew do his thing, and we will comment on that as we go. I think it would also be helpful to hear from experienced people that's done this before. So besides Andrew, Stan, Kim, Amy. Amy, oh my gosh, she's done like how many times, Amy? Three times. There you go. Amy is our Molly Land queen. And so all of these people know what they're doing because they've done that multiple times. So we're going to hear from their specific perspectives as well. All right, Andrew.
Okay. So I've kind of broken down this chat, I guess, into like 3 parts. So first we're going to start off with like what resolutions are. And resolutions essentially in the most simple form are the policies that committees in the United Nations have passed over the course of all of history and time. So in your position papers, in the second paragraph, hopefully everyone listed resolutions that have been passed and read the resolutions and kind of have seen how they're formatted and that sort of thing. So resolutions in themselves provide a synopsis of what's already been done in the United Nations and the policy that you're trying to put forth or pass through committee. So it's basically a synopsis of your second and third paragraphs in your position papers for specific topics, but we'll get to the structure and kind of thing in a little bit. So second, the resolution of structure, the structure of resolutions. I'm going to stand up for this part. So resolutions are broken down into 2 main components. You have your preambular clauses, which come first because preambular, and you have your operative clauses. Now, in the delegate prep guide, they give you giant lists of clauses. Let me look at this really fast. They like give you a list of words that you start off with clauses. It's on preambular clauses are on page 36, and operative clauses are on page 39. And you've used a bunch of them already before, especially in paragraph 2, when you say paragraph 2 and 3 of your position papers, when you're like, Sao Tome and Principe affirms, that's a preambular clause. So anything where you're referring back to things that have already been done at the United Nations is a preambular clause, and there's lots of words that you can use that with, if that makes sense. So they're used to refer to relevant precedents, it's like looking back at things that have already been done is what preambular clauses are doing. And then operative clauses are your third paragraph. They're the recommendations. So they're very active rather than passive like preambular clauses are. So what your operative clauses are doing are explaining your policies. They're kind of like recommending or encouraging or promoting the things that you want to get passed through committee. And I'm not going to deal a whole lot with the, what's the term, format specifically, because it's a lot to go over in class, and we have workshops that we're going to be doing that in, right? Is that okay? Okay. But basically, you list your preambular clauses, and then you say this little blurb about the delegates from these 19 countries or whatever that are sponsoring recommend these following things, and you list them numerically and that sort of thing. In your prep guide, if you've read it, it says that resolutions are one long sentence. So when you start writing, you use commas and semicolons to separate operative and preambular clauses, and then you have one period at the end. So, for example, the delegation from Sao Tome and Principe affirms this, comma, affirms this, recognizes that, and based on those things, recommends, comma, encourages, semicolon, whatever, until the end, and then it's just a period at the end. Okay, so we've done that. All right, so specifically at the conference, we're going to have you like write a practice resolution that you're not allowed to take to the conference because it's prohibited. So the practice resolution's on one of the topics from your position paper. Is that true? Okay. So we'll have you do that starting Thursday, I think, or next week. So here's how it's going to work once you're at the conference. So every resolution starts with what's called a working paper. And a working paper is a paper that has just started being written. You're working on it with other sponsors, and I'll talk about the difference between sponsors and signatories here in a second. But it's just that. It's just a working paper. It hasn't been approved by the dais, which is in charge of your committee, or anything like that. So once you've got your ideas down on paper and you have 20% of the committee are signatories, then you can submit your working paper to the dais, and they will say either approve or disapprove of it, and it will become a draft resolution. Now, a draft resolution is what is going to be voted on during voting procedure at the end of the conference. And if it's passed, that's when it becomes a resolution. So in order for what you've been working on for the entire week and semester in your policy to become a true resolution based on the simulation, then it has to be approved by the committee and voted on by the committee. Does that make sense? Otherwise, it's a draft resolution, or if it doesn't even get that far, a working paper. Okay, so there's two types of actors in the committees. There's sponsors and there's signatories. Sponsors are those delegates that are working with you writing the paper. So, for example, you'll be in committee and you'll go up to people that you think that have the same policies as you or that sort of thing, and you'll discuss with them what their policies are, and eventually you'll start sitting down and writing. And it'll be a group of, it could be 2 people or it could be 20. I don't recommend 20. It's horrible if you have 20. I would recommend somewhere between 7 and 10. That way everyone can get their ideas in, whatever. But those are the people that are actually writing the resolution or the draft resolution / working paper. Signatories are simply countries that have read your working paper, or delegates that have read your working paper and are interested in turning that working paper into a draft resolution. So they'll read it and they'll be like, sure, I don't really want to write with you guys on this because I'm doing my other thing, but I kind of like it, or I might disagree with this a little bit, but I'll sign on to it. And in order for your working paper to become a draft resolution, You have to have at least 20% of countries in your committee sign on to it or become a signatory of it, which requires a lot of grunt work and just going around and being interpersonal and talking to people. And yeah, that's what diplomacy is about communication and talking to other people. Or if your committee is super small, I don't think there's any small committees, are there? No. Okay, well, if there's a committee of like 7, then at least 5, there has to be like 5 signatories, or whichever is greater, 5 or 20%. And your dais will tell you the exact number of people you need to sign on once I think it's sponsors and signatories combined. Yes. Yeah, so if you have 20 sponsors, then like you're already halfway there. Okay.
All right. What are the downsides of having 20 sponsors?
The downsides of having 20 sponsors are there's no way that all 20 sponsors will agree on what would be in the draft resolution. So your goal of when you're at the conference working on a working paper is to get the policy that you prescribed in your position paper passed through committee and voted into a resolution, which becomes tricky when people don't agree with what your policy is. So if you're in a working group of 20 countries and you have opposite ideas of how you should address a problem, maybe you should look to get out of that working group, because you can't have 2 opposite policies in the same resolution. It's contradictory. The dais will point it out, and they'll be like, no, you're not allowed.
And that's why we're going to read and skim through and then read the position papers beforehand, so
Right.
that you know that you're not going to be in a working group that proposes something that's completely contradictory to what you were proposing, right? So that's one of the benefits of it. Skim out people that are like, this is really lame, like, not working with you, buddy. You can be a signatory, but not a sponsor.
Right.
And then looking for people that have policies that are similar to yours, they were going to be working with, right? So pretty much what we're doing is like pre-scouting who the working group is going to be based on how good they are, but also based on, quote, natural alliance patterns, right? So we are a African country. Are there other African countries that have policies similar to ours? We are a small island country, as we talked a whole lot in the UNIA document. Are there other small countries, island countries, that are not necessarily in Africa, but are small island countries that we might want to partner with? And then go check your position papers and see if that is a delegate that you want to work with. So if you work with too many sponsors, which is really the size of your working group, you get into a collective action problem, right? Which is, it's like doing group assignments with 15 or 20 people. You know that's not going to get done. You're going to have lots of problems. You cannot be too small because you need a decent number of people working with you. So really 7 to 10 is a really good group that you have good enough sponsors that you can get work done, these people that you agree with, and that you kind of like pre-selected as being hardworking people, but like not too big as 20 where you're not going to be able to be productive. Like, so the larger the group, the less productive that group is. I mean, that's basic political science and undergrad work life.
Yep.
Another thing why sponsors matter is when you're talking about
Amendments.
amendments.
I haven't got there yet. Go for amendments. Okay.
What's a good number of how many sponsors you want?
7 to 10.
7 to 10?
I think Chris had a bunch.
How many do you have?
Yeah.
You have 25?
20
Yeah,
something.
25.
How
I
does
just
that
counted.
work?
Well, really, I mean, one of you should be writing and one of you should be kind of like herd control in that situation. So like Stan did a lot of the writing, but there was a lot of countries that would like come up to us randomly and say, I have a problem with this or this or this, and they would want to immediately go to the people who are writing.
Okay,
But
let's,
instead
We had it broken up into groups.
Yeah.
So I said, you countries do this, you countries do that, you countries do that. And then they brought it to me and I put into the paper what was good.
Look at Stan.
brackets. Did you hear what just happened here?
You can see how Stan is in control.
Comment number 1. Every single one of you is bringing your computer to the conference because you are going to use it every day. The key to a successful resolution writing, which as Andrew was saying before, is making sure that your third paragraph gets to be a part of the resolution is you actually are the person typing the working paper and draft resolution, right? Because if you are the person typing, you're making sure that you type your stuff right in there as you add other people's stuff as well. So being the typer is really like it's a gatekeeper, right? So that's right. One, you were bringing your position paper, you're bringing a computer, you were bringing your list of clauses, you were coming fully prepared, you have your position paper, you've got a position papers before, so that would matter a lot. Well, something that Stan and Chris did that worked really well, they had a really working group, a really big working group, 20 to 25 people. But notice this, first of all, Stan and Chris took control of the group. So, in something that I've seen Amy do before multiple times, right? So, because they know what they're doing, because they understand the problem, they know how to write a resolution, right? Because we've done this before. They know what it looks like, what goes in and what doesn't go in. That confidence allows other people to trust them, that they know they're doing, so that they can confidently say, you person do this, you person do that, you go talk to the delegate over there, and I'm going to sit here and type things down, and when you guys are done working, bring it to me and I'll type it down, right? So that's number one, and I've seen like, and when, you know, my eyes were shining, and I have like joy in my heart when I saw those things, like the proudest Model 1 professor / mama ever. Like, oh my gosh, you don't even understand, right? And I've seen that happen with other students as well multiple times, but that means that you guys did your homework, you're confident, and your confidence shows off, and other people trust you to do those things. Because the working group is abnormally large, and that's another thing that I saw, and I was like so thrilled, which is Stan sitting there writing things and bossing people around, really doing the fun, bossing them around, kind of sort of. And Chris literally like whipping votes, like every problem, everyone who wants to become a problem, who wants to disagree with something. So Chris is a lobbyist. And so he would talk to every one of those people and convince them why they should change. And do you want to elaborate more on that?
Wait,
I just think it was
didn't we had North Korea as a signatory, South Korea as so North Korea was a sponsor, South Korea as a signatory, then we had Israel as a signatory and Palestine.
This is good diplomacy there. You see
Lots
what's
of problems
happened
there.
here, people? Lots of problems, but they worked the problems really well, right? So part of that reason is that their partnership really worked. They divided responsibilities really well. Stan was very knowledgeable and confident in all the resolution writing, as were other people in other groups. I know Andrew is more resolution writing than a lobbyist, but usually you want one of you to be a writer and one of you to be a lobbyist, right? And that can go parts in what regards personality or just what you feel more comfortable with, work with your partner, but it works really well like that. It's a good dynamic. Right, so and that's something that you're going to have with your partner, in a sense, would be like a good dynamic. But all the foundation of all of that is really like you know what you're talking about and you know what you're doing. And when you tell people, well, actually, this is not how this is done because this is not a preambular clause, but here is a list of preambular clauses. And did you know that this is how we format a resolution? But then they're like, oh, and then they trust you, and then you get to successfully get to control what comes in or out, get to control like quotation marks, because there's lots of like negotiation and lobbying and convincing people, and there you go. So lobbyist, writer. Close bracket. Chris, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't really.
It was fantastic. I'm just saying, like, I'm the proudest. Yes. Yes, I have so many happy moments. Was Chris posted something on Instagram or Facebook? Not watching the list.
Yeah.
All moral notes. Hey,
Yes.
do we need to get like notes made with our name like everyone else did?
We might want to do that.
I agree with that.
Because you were ripping paper and just like
All right, so during the conference, we had lots of little notes that are sent to other delegations. You can rip a piece of paper and send them a note, but some delegations have like a kind of like a mini
Like a notepad.
notepad with their names and all of that.
It makes it way easier.
and their emails on it too.
Yeah.
In the emails. If that's something you're interested in, we have funds for that because I have a good amount of money to give back to you, so we can take out that money. Which it shouldn't be that expensive either. It's like a notepad shouldn't be too bad.
Mm.
So if that's something you're interested in, let's look into it, which I think is kind of really cool.
Mhm.
This is professional too, like here.
A lot of people made business cards, like
Yeah.
for like first impressions, just to like, here's like my email, like if you have ideas, email me, kind of a thing. And I was just like, no,
No, I don't have a business card.
I don't like you. Okay.
Okay, so we're gonna look into that because we have some money.
Yeah.
That I have to get back to. All right. Anyone else wants to comment on those things? Amy, Kim, Stan.
A resolution is an AutoCAD, it's a position paper.
It's true.
So be happy. Because you did all the work in the position paper.
Boom.
So basically your resolution is just restating it in UN terms.
So we've been through the worst,
Yeah.
people. There we go.
February is over.
Yeah.
Nobody's doing report writing.
I think someone is doing report writing.
So you need to do report writing. Are you guys doing a report or? Oh, yours is a report writing. Okay, we might get together. The four of us, I think, or the two of us, or the four of us. If yours is report writing or a resolution, because the format is slightly different,
Mhm.
right? So for a resolution, you have like each clause is like a semicolon.
Mhm.
And then you have like a final period at the very end. Before a report writing, you have like short sentences. So it's less verbose than a resolution. But the most important thing is that the basics are the same, which is know the work that has been done before and what is it you're proposing. And so you're still going to use your second and third paragraphs. It's just the language is slightly different. The format is slightly different. And that's why if you're doing a report, then again, read this again and we'll get together to go. And they're also going to be working on the workshop anyways. So
Mhm.
yeah, it should be fine. Any more comments before I keep on going? See, you've been through the hardest part. If you can do this, you pretty much can do anything. Andrew?
All right. The next thing I want to talk about is amendments to resolutions.
Yeah.
Because in my experience, they don't happen super frequently, but when they do happen, everyone is confused and no one knows what's going on. So it's good to know what's going on if an amendment is proposed. Okay, so there's two types of amendments. The first one is called a friendly amendment, and basically it's an amendment that is proposed in writing to the sponsors of a resolution. So or to the sponsors of a draft resolution. So what will happen is either one of the sponsors that is unhappy with some of the wording in the resolution, or another member, probably a signatory, will rewrite a clause from your draft resolution and submit it to the dais with your resolution number. And what will happen is the dais will give you that piece of paper amendment, the friendly amendment, and the sponsors of that resolution will discuss, vote, if you want to say it that, and if it's unanimously agreed upon by the sponsors, then that amendment will be put directly into the draft resolution without any vote from the entire committee.
Bracket. That's an important reason why not that many sponsors is important.
Yes.
Right, because if you have any friendly amendment and you need a consensus, like unanimity of all the sponsors, it's much easier to get 7 people to agree than to get 25, right? Because if the amendment is opposed by any one of the sponsors, then it becomes an unfriendly amendment, which means it's going to go to vote, and then that's a pain.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
So that's why 7 to 10 might be a good number. Did you guys at large committee get lots of amendments?
We got one through, and then China won something, and we didn't get them all, and then they tried to do it unfriendly, and I feel like unfriendly amendments never get passed. So ours we didn't have one get passed
Okay.
in the entire committee.
And also, another thing too is if you are talking to, if it is a big group, then you know that like a signatory is mad about something or they want something changed, and you can recommend. I think we recommended a couple of countries who left who were really close to the end, and they got out. Russia and India got out really
As a
close to the
sponsor.
end. Yeah, because it's like we'd rather have you out and go work with somebody else rather than mess up your account.
Because there's some people who are just, you can't work with them.
Right.
And
Yeah.
once you spot them, it's easy just to cut them off.
Mhm.
Yeah, which is again, there's another aspect of the diplomacy, which is you're gonna have to talk to people and make those judgment calls and say this person just doesn't really work well, and say sorry, buddy. In a very nice diplomatic way, don't say sorry, buddy. Especially if you're not Americans. But yes, close bracket, importance of number of sponsors to friendly amendments.
Yes. All right. Second type of amendment, as she already said, is unfriendly, which is proposed by any member of the committee and is voted on by the entire committee to be put into your draft resolution. And this becomes very tricky because technically, if you have like an enemy of your draft resolution, they can propose an unfriendly amendment and then have it be voted into a real resolution without any of the sponsors agreeing to it, which is just not fun to deal with. We had someone try and do that to my committee last year, and it was close. It was like probably 57% voted no for the amendment and 43% voted yes, and I was very upset.
And that matters because if someone that's quote an enemy and they're making an amendment to your draft resolution, probably is an amendment whose content goes against something that your sponsors really believe in.
Yeah.
Right? So that pretty much really ruins, like it spoils the resolution for you. Because if someone that's quote an enemy gets to approve an unfriendly amendment that has something that goes significantly against your foreign policy, at the end, you'll be voting on your resolution as a whole, unless there's an option to break it down, but most of the time you're going to be voting it as a whole, and you might have to vote against your draft resolution if there is something that's ridiculously outrageous that got passed as an amendment, right? So that's why it is tricky, and that's why it's important that you understand how the process works, like what is an amendment, how it works, friendly and unfriendly. Try to solve things friendly as possible,
Definitely.
but if not, you're going to have to lobby against unfriendly amendments, which can be really tricky.
Oh, and that kind of, this reminds me of, just for future reference, a sponsor can vote against it and it still goes through, because China was saying that they could veto the entire thing and trying to leverage that to make them do something, and we were like, no, you can't. And so just for future reference, they can't do that.
Okay, explain that situation better.
So like China's like, change this or we're gonna vote no, and if we vote no, the whole thing fails.
The whole draft resolution.
And we were like, no, and they're like, yeah, because we're sponsors. And so they're trying to make people support that change because they thought the whole thing would fail. So just so y'all know, like, they can't do that.
Yeah, so what they're trying to do is trying to blame people who are unaware of the rules, unaware of what a sponsor can and cannot do. Pretty much try to lie to people and say, you're a sponsor, if you're not behind it, this thing's gonna not be approved. It's not true, right? So if they vote against, they vote against. But that's why I say, like, learning the rules is power, right? So learning how things work is power because you don't get to be lied to, right? See our integration of faith and moment here. Know the word of God, so you not ever get to be lied to, and that's how you good, your good, healthy Christian life and walk. Integration of faith and learning, close bracket. Remember that for the course evaluations. For real, get to know the rules, and get to know your Bible as well, so that people won't lie to you. There you go, close bracket.
All right. Does everyone understand the difference in amendments?
So the first one is not voted on, it's just agreed on.
Yeah.
The friendly, okay.
It's agreed on by the sponsors
And it
in
doesn't go to a
consensus.
vote.
It doesn't go to a vote by committee. So what will happen is, specifically at the conference, they'll give you a resolution or a draft resolution number or a working paper number, and they'll call up the sponsors for that draft resolution, and they'll say you've had a friendly amendment proposed, and they'll like give it to you for you to read and look over. And if all the sponsors come to a consensus that either that yes, like we'll accept the amendment, then it is immediately put into the draft resolution. If one of them is like, no, I don't agree with that, then it goes away and it could come back as an unfriendly amendment if the person that proposed it wants to continue pushing for it. To the dais. It's also in writing, but it's considered unfriendly. Like you can decide when you propose an amendment.
Yeah, so when you propose, you decide whether it is a friendly or unfriendly. And the point of a friendly amendment is that it's usually about clarifying the language. It's usually about something minor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it's something that fundamentally changes the content of one of the clauses of the resolution, then probably the sponsors are going to say no. So it's going to be unfriendly anyways, right? So usually a friendly amendment should be some sort of clarification on the language, or add some minor thing, or take out some minor thing, or rewrite this in a slightly different, clearer way, right? And that's why it's okay if you have consensus amongst the sponsors. Here people, they're proposing that this is to be clear, and if it doesn't go against anyone's foreign policy, sure, it does again to go to a vote. It's not as big as a problem, and you're controlling what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it goes out to a vote, then you don't have control anymore. I mean, you can still lobby, but you don't have as much control of whether that thing's going to happen or not, if it's an unfriendly amendment.
This is just like a little caveat. You can, as a sponsor, I know that my committee did this. In fact, I did this. I had to change working groups the last day because no one was agreeing with each other, and so we couldn't get anything done. So I just like left and found other people and got my policies implemented. But because of that, we ran out of time before we had to submit the draft resolution. So what we decided as sponsors, there was 7 of us, what we decided as sponsors was, in order to go through a loophole in the system, that we had things that were already ideas, so we wrote them out in form of friendly amendments and just submitted them to the dais to continue to make the draft exactly what we wanted after it was already submitted. Which
This
is
is the last minute resort.
this is last minute. Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that.
Yes.
Don't do that.
My working group's failing. I have to change things last minute, the last day. Things are not working. So sure. And that's again knowing how the rules work, and you make them work for you, right, to your advantage. Ideally, though,
Don't do
what
that.
you really want is to be in a good work group from the beginning. Be more or less in control of the situation, because there is no 100% control. You're always going to have some people to put out fires, to do the lobbying, to do convincing, and all of that. That's normal part of what goes on. And that's why the importance of go over position papers and see people that you think you can work with. But that's only half of it, right? Because the second half is their personality. And you don't get to know their personality until you get there. Because they might be really smart, but if they're really hard to work with, like that doesn't help as well. But at least like half of the part of the problem, which is this someone that knows what they're doing, you can pre-select that in advance. And when you get there, there's the part of personality and work ethics and collegiality that you'll only get to know once you get to know them.
Bring a power strip, because if you do, everyone will be your best friend.
That's true.
Bring a what?
A power strip to plug in.
A surge protector. Definitely have one.
Yes, all right. Bring a power strip. Okay? Not only bring your computers, bring a power strip. If you have a power strip, you have power. Metaphorically and literally.
Yep.
And make sure you have your charge in the ground.
Oh yeah. You will be sitting on the ground a lot.
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
I lost my phone and then somehow
Oh my
some
gosh.
Australian girl found
That really happened. Stan lost his phone.
No, well, an outlet.
And then they gave it to me, and then I want to give it back to him. No, and then they gave it to a security person, and then I went to pick it up, and the security person didn't believe me, and so I had to call Stan's phone and say, I'm calling him right here. You see, I really know this person.
I didn't even realize it was gone until Chris got a text like, you have your phone, and I was like,
Yeah.
You can use that for, as like a portable.
There you go.
Power strip.
Okay, so power strip everyone, computers everyone.
All right.
Wait, I have
Let's
a
see.
question though. So
Yes.
you submitted your draft resolution and then made a friendly amendment to your own
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, alright.
Oh, and
Okay.
are we going to mergers?
Merge. You want to talk about mergers? Okay. Yeah.
Okay, what about
So
others?
mergers are the worst. All right. So what'll happen is towards the end of the week, once they've read working papers. So they make you submit your working papers as well so they can read over and see if you're on the right track or whatever. What'll happen is they'll get 15 or 16 working papers and they'll group them together and they'll call up all of these countries and be like, you guys are talking about basically the same thing. We suggest you merge working groups, which means you have to start the process over with different countries. And it's not a whole lot of fun, but it makes the draft resolutions, one, it makes them better because there's a better influx of ideas. And it makes it easier on the dais and the rest of the committee to vote because voting on 16 resolutions and reading over 16 draft resolutions is just not fun at all. So they try and narrow it down. They'll collapse 2 working groups into one, which just means you get to meet more people. So be positive about it. If there is a conflict that you run into, they don't require you to merge. But if there's a conflict or something that you run into and you're like, well, we don't like this, and that's the main tenet of their resolution or draft resolution, then the dice is like, okay, do your own thing. But for the most part, they like you to merge towards the end. Another thing that I have written down is they throw you into it immediately. So Sunday you dress up and they'll give you a little talk and then you're in committee immediately. Immediately. There's no we're going to do a practice round. Nope. It's go. And as soon as everything starts happening, 150 people's hands shoot up with notes to pass to other people because they're prepared and they've read other position papers and they know who they want to work with. So I know that was super whoa, what's happening for me last year. So, so be prepared. They'll throw you right into the ring immediately. So you start working on working papers the day the conference starts.
So do you pick people you work with, or do you?
Yeah.
It's like a big, the very first night's it's almost like a social, just not social, but you are deciding on which 2 topics, right?
Yep.
2 topics you pick out of the 3. And so you want to get with people that agree with you on which topics you want, and then you kind of you really just have to go around and socialize with people, get to know them, and
Must be really dramatic.
It is.
yeah, it is.
Yeah, there's so many people talking.
So here's what'll happen.
You pick all 3, you should put them in
Yeah.
order.
So the first night you'll go into the room and you'll what's called set the agenda. And setting the agenda is deciding which topics you want to talk about. So you have 3 topics. Every committee has 3 topics. And so I'm going to pick on GA2. GA2, which topic do you think is your best topic?
I like the first one just because I wrote it myself. Let's go with the third one.
What's the third one about?
The inequalities.
Okay. So what you would do is when you get there, you'd be like, okay, so we feel like this problem needs to be addressed in the world. And you'd say inequality, blah, 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 is super bad and we need to fix it. It's more important than the other 2, so we want inequality first. And after inequality, we think the next worst problem in the world is whatever one that is. So you would say, you'd get up to the mic and you'd be talk. Oh, there's a microphone in every room that you have to talk into. And yeah, it's public speaking 101 and it's a lot of fun. So you go up there and you'll explain, you'll have 90 seconds or whatever to explain why you want that topic to be discussed or what order you want the topics to be in. So you choose an order. You choose your order, so you have your order. So let's say your order is topic 3, topic 1, topic 2, right? And so you want to go during informal sessions, which we'll talk more about this during parliamentary procedure. So you'll go and you'll talk to people and be like, so what do you think we should discuss, blah, blah, blah. They're like, oh, we think topic 1's more important. And they're like, oh, well, what about topic 3? And they're like, yeah, sure, whatever, not really. And then you're like, okay, well, nice meeting you, delegate from China. And then you move on. And you'll find a group of people that are like, yeah, topic 3, we need to talk about topic 3. And what will happen is a line will form, and it'll be like, we motion to set the agenda at 3, 1, 2. And then another person will step up. We motion to set the agenda at 1:32 or whatever. The most important thing to note is that you only discuss one topic. So if someone sets the agenda at 3:21 and someone that sets the agenda at 3:12,
You don't care.
doesn't matter. Pick one. Pick the one that has the most support so that you can further increase your chances of getting topic 3 first. So that's what you'll do the first night. I think we set the agenda in like 30 minutes for GA1.
Yeah, it's really
And then it's like, so the agenda's set, we're talking about transnational organized crime is what we talked about. And it's just like, cool. And then you go and you just talk to people and you're like, what are your ideas? What do you think we should do to solve this? And that's when the working group starts to form on the first night after setting the agenda.
So first you find a committee group, then you find a working group,
So you're in committee.
or like you put in your group, and then you find your working group within your committee group?
Yeah. But like the working group isn't set, so you can change working groups. I don't recommend changing working groups past like Monday. Does that make sense? So setting the agenda is fun. It's a good time. You get to meet people, see which people are smart and which people are only there to have fun. There are plenty of those.
So you don't want to be working with those people. There's really like some students that only go there to have fun and get drunk or whatever, and they'll even show up for committee. It's like sad. Don't work with those people.
Don't do it.
And by the way,
What are some telltale signs of those people? Like stuff to look out for?
Oh, you will know.
even though, yeah, even though.
They'll let you know.
They'll make you like, what are you doing?
Bodies, like that's yeah. And by the way, we are going under the league covenant. Okay, we are under the league covenant. No one is having any alcoholic beverages for any reason whatsoever. And if I catch you, and I am really good, if I get you, I am flying you out of the conference regardless. You were paying for changing your ticket back, and I'm shipping you back. It's the same thing for all the other rules of the covenant. Thanks to God, we don't really have any boyfriend girlfriend thing here that I have to be overly concerned about this time around. Yes. Anyways, no getting out, having sex with random people, no getting drunk. I'm just gonna say it because if it happens, like I'm shipping you back. I'm not even kidding. We have rules here, and I'm really mean about them. Don't break the covenant. You are under my responsibility. I tend to be a very good steward of all under my responsibility. And yes, don't do it, people. Not that you will do. This is like in an alternative universe, in case, evil versions of you would break the covenant. But I'm just saying, no. No, no, no. Don't do such a thing. All right, don't get drunk. Don't drink. I'll ship you back at your cost. There is a process for that. I call Ellen McClung. Ellen McClung calls her parents. Your parent gets overly upset at you, blah, blah, blah. But I'm not even kidding. That never happened before, by the way, in none of the trips that I've been, because I put the fear of God, I hope, that you have the fear of God. And there you go. It's supposed to be a good thing. But yes, don't, so if we start inviting you to parties, like, no. Okay?
I promise that you will not want to do any of that because it is so exhausting.
So tired.
It is like you go from 8 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night and you're constantly talking to people and constantly like working. There's not a whole lot of just sitting around being lazy. It is, so by 10 o'clock at night, you're like, I want a snack and I want to go to bed.
There you go. Pretty much, that's how it works. And that's how we know as well. So if the next day in the morning and you see they look like they're hungover, they're probably hungover, you don't want to work with them. Right?
Also, people will just stop showing up.
Yeah.
Stop showing up.
And then you don't want to work with them
And
anyway.
they'll show up like last week, hey guys. Just came out of it.
So like GA has 193 countries. There was like 170 on the first night, and by the end, like during roll call, it was 120. It's just like people are just like, nah, I'm done with that. But yeah.
All right, so any questions?
Who wants pronouns? Just get to pre-order them.
Oh gosh, yes, have to pre-order the pronouns.
That's
You
like
are in charge of the
The
pronouns.
20th. The 20th when it'll open up. So we have to find a day when we can go pick them up and and we need to know how many we want, and everyone will have to give like money, so it's like $5.75 each.
Okay, I'll see with Philip if he can go pick him up while we're in the meeting. Because
Okay.
Philip's coming.
Well, they have like a 6 hour, I think 6 hour shelf life, so we have to,
Okay.
yeah, time it out.
Okay, I'm gonna put Philip on task for that. All right, so a few things. Recap. Read this before next class. Make sure and have this with you when you're in committee. Andrew, can you go online and get the Word document for the
the resolution sample.
The resolution sample.
Put
Because
it on
the
middle.
next class, when we start doing the workshop, we can work in the format that you were supposed to be working. So one for report and one for resolution. You guys need to let me know if you're doing a report or a resolution, so go double check your committee and which one it is, so that we can start working on that. What else do I want to say now? If you have any questions about anything, any of the things that we've said, or any of the process, just don't be quiet. Let us know. Really, in this case, like